Hello, everyone. Welcome to the More Than Robots podcast. My name is Christian Bankovic, and here I have with me Arjun from Wizards.exe. Could you please tell us more about yourself?
Hi, I'm Arjun. I'm from Team 9794 Wizards.exe, based in Rockville, Maryland. We're a community team, and this next year is going to be our 6th year competing.
I also have with me a teammate from my team, Event Horizon, Kanan Hawley.
Yes, hello.
Today we are going to be talking about the game manual, part 1. Both we're going to talk about the changes between last year's game manual and this year's game manual. Then we'll discuss the changes between, like the differences between traditional events and remote events. As I understand, Arjun, your team put together a document listing all these changes, right?
Yeah, so we have a document which can be put in the chat or is in the description. We'll send it to you somehow, which has all of the changes between last year's game manual, this year's game manual, as well as between traditional and remote events.
You guys listed them, into subcategories, right?
Yes.
There's rankings, engineering documentation, how like advancement between competitions changed, and electronics and mechanical, and then there's some other miscellaneous things. So let's start by discussing how the rankings changed. So what exactly how do ranking points work this year?
Yeah, so I think I'll start off with a really brief description of what they were in previous years, which was the first way that it was ranked was the number of wins and losses that your team had, and then the second, which was called ranking points, and the second was called tiebreaker points, and that was the number of points the opposing alliances scored, the sum of that.
Mm-hmm.
But this year, now what we have is its ranking points is going to be the sum of your team's or your alliance's score. And then for breaking ties, they'll go for your sum of your autonomous scores and then your sum of your alliance's end game scores or team. So depending on if you're in remote or in person, it'll either be your alliance or your team. And I think this is actually a really good change. What do you guys think?
I like it. So, as I understand, you mentioned the ranking points as well as the tiebreaker points, the TBPs.
Yeah. So the sum of your score is called ranking points, and then the next two things are called TBP1 and TBP2 for tiebreaker point 1 and tiebreaker points 2.
And then I believe the fourth, if all three of those tie, it's a random selection. Right?
Yeah, so the random selection, I honestly don't see it happening at all in competition. It really depends on the game, but it's going to be very, very hard to get it to the random selection stage.
Yeah.
But I really like this because it discourages teams from farming ranking points or RP farming as it was called in the past, where essentially teams would just score for the other alliance, which would actually boost their place in the ranking. And while it was a really valid strategy to get yourself to the top of the rankings, it wasn't ideal. Like, you want it to be based off of what your team and what your alliance can do, not based off of how many points you can score for the other alliance.
So, Kanan, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think that the season's ranking point systems, like the whole rankings thing in general, is much better than last season's. Much less, I don't know. can't find the right word. I guess foolproof, maybe.
Yeah, that's about the word. About the word you're looking
Yeah.
for. Okay, so moving on to engineering documentation. So I read that we're not calling it engineering notebook anymore. It's now engineering documentation.
Yes. So they removed all references of the words engineering followed by the word notebook from the both game manuals, where in the past it had been referenced in the game manual in places other than like the season specific places.
Mm-hmm. So I think, can't we still have our engineering notebook? It's just we will turn in our engineering documentation, which will be about 15 pages.
So going into this is something that's not 100% official from first.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, they replaced engineering notebook with engineering documentation in the game manual. And then I know my team, as well as a couple other teams in different regions, so this is not just a region-specific rule, have heard that it's going to be much shorter than engineering notebook. And one of the teams that actually heard that, because I was talking to a few of them, heard that it was going to be around 15 pages in length, just like a summary of your team that you would submit to the judges. And yes, you still can have an engineering notebook, and I'm assuming they're going to encourage you to have an engineering notebook, but I think that they're doing this just because of COVID, because some teams might not be able to actually get the time to write up a whole engineering notebook and document it. So engineering documentation is simpler, but it's worth noting that there's been nothing official from it. It's just stuff that a couple teams have heard and corroborated.
Mm-hmm.
And just regarding that, we have no idea what's going to happen for the awards with engineering documentation. There was supposed to be something coming out around today or like yesterday, but they haven't released it and they never posted publicly about it.
Mm-hmm.
But especially the Think Award, because the Think Award is almost based completely on engineering notebook.
It is.
Yeah, so I personally think that it's just going to be you submit like some math and physics, or like you submit a brief of that, but we have no idea what's going to happen.
So now the order of advancement changed. I read a little bit like more in the game manual about that earlier, and I don't quite understand it.
Okay, so as you may know, ARM started sponsoring the Control Award last year. And previously the Control Award was the bottom award, but it's sponsored now, so it's more than likely it moved up partially due to that and the fact that it was sponsored. But I'm actually also happy about this change, because essentially what it did was it switched control and design. And if you'll read the award description for design, it has something to do with robot aesthetics as well as incorporating industrial design. So sometimes you would see the design award being given to the team with the nicest looking robot, but sometimes it would be given to like the team that used CAD. It's a really subjective award, like more subjective than some of the other awards that have been given. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually quite happy. So essentially, just to summarize, all they really did was switch control and design. So they didn't really change anything else for the advancement.
Okay. So there were some control systems and electronic stuff that they made legal and they made illegal. I did hear that we can now use a couple of new PlayStation controllers to control the robot with.
Yep. So this is something that I think been asking first for a while, which is new controllers, because previously there were two options for controllers: the Logitech F310s, which are widely available, but their joysticks are honestly not that good, and the Xbox 360 wired controllers, which you couldn't get new unless you want to pay like hundreds of dollars, or you could get them used, and
Yeah.
they just weren't easy to get your hands on. So what they added was they added the DualShock 4 controllers, which is what's included with like PS4s and stuff. And as well as they included an at-park wired PS4 controller. It's basically just a knockoff third-party DualShock 4. So making that the controllers are really accessible. I also really like this because of the fact that a lot of students have PS4s. So adding like the PS4 controller is going to make it so that a lot of students don't actually have to buy a controller. They can just use the controller they already own.
Huh. I didn't know that. I personally have an Xbox, so
Yeah.
I would know.
Yeah. So the PS4 controller is pretty good. I know that it would be nice for them to include old current gen consoles, like allow teams to use the Xbox One controller, maybe the Elite Series Xbox Elite controller, and like the Switch Pro controller, Joy-Cons, that type of thing. But from what I can tell, it's going to be a lot more work for them to implement any Nintendo Switch controllers in the SDK versus the PS4 Xbox controller, just due to the fact that they use a different interface than the Xbox and PS4 controllers. They use an older interface. And yeah, so other control system stuff. So last year they had a pilot for the Control Hub for, I believe, around 250 teams. And this year it's legal for all teams. Essentially what the Control Hub is it's a Rev expansion hub merged with the processor of a phone.
Huh.
So it's that. They
I
made
had
it
heard
legal.
I had heard of it, and it sounds really cool.
Yeah, so we have a couple. You can buy them now, but if you're listening in on this, I would recommend you buy one now if you can, just because we're not sure about the availability of their product because of COVID. Like when the expansion hub came out, there was a huge shortage of it. So similar thing could be done for the Control Hub, maybe. We don't know. Best bet is to just buy it now since it's in stock. And one thing that's bad about the Control Hub, though, is that it doesn't have a camera built in or a screen built in.
Oh yeah.
So it has an HDMI port, so you can put a display on your robot, but you can't do that for competitions. So that means that like debugging might be a bit harder, and then you'll have to use a webcam. There's a few other changes for control system. Do you guys have anything else to add so far?
So I heard there were some phones that were made illegal.
Yeah. Basically, the Nexus, ZTE, and Samsung Galaxy S5 phones were made illegal. This is something that they said in last year's game manual that it was going to be illegal for this season. And I know that my team's going to have to buy phones since we used exclusively Nexus and ZTE Speed phones.
Oh.
But they've been around for a while. Like those, I believe those were the three phones that were originally legal for FTC back in like 2016. They're pretty much just obsolete. So those phones, they also removed any mention of the modern robotics control system, which was used back in 2016, 2017 or 2015 through 2017 for 2 seasons, and everybody hated it. So when Rev came out, we were like, yeah, Rev expansion all the way.
And
Okay.
also, they've changed because people had flashing lights on the robot and they used to flash really fast. They changed the LED flashing from whatever it was before to 1 hertz or less to not trigger seizures.
They did. And I think that is a great thing. That is absolutely great.
Yeah, that's a rule. It was never there before, and I feel like they expected teams to think of it as common sense, but I think they just forgot to. Nobody thought about it, and then somebody was like, "Hey, this is something we should think about now that the Blinken is becoming more popular."
Oh
And
yeah,
it's a good rule.
absolutely. Okay, so is there anything else that's like mechanical that, or rather electronic control systems that we should talk about?
So for control system stuff, a few things they meant removed from the game manual, but it's also worth noting that if you get a control hub, change the password from the default password to something control hub specific. It's a rule in the game manual now. And then they also have a list of minimum OSs for the phones and control hub that you have to use. So look at that list in the game manual and upgrade the operating system of all your phones and control hubs to at least pass the minimum.
Okay. That is a good thought to remember. Okay, so moving on to mechanical, one of the things I'm really excited about that might tell what might be coming up this next season is no vacuum-based mechanics. They made that illegal. So I really think that might mean we might have something that's smooth that we might have to manipulate.
Yeah. My thoughts on it, I think there's been 2 teams that have done vacuums in the past. 40-42 last year and 60-55 in rescue, gear ticks and rescue, non-standard deviation last year. And I feel like it's going to become more common if they don't put a stop to it. I don't think they wanted those teams to do it in the first place, just because it's going to become more common. I'm not sure if they wanted teams to do it just because it can open up so many rooms for error and just like the tolerances of the materials. Like last year, the stone had a really small hole in it. Maybe that hole wasn't like actually in the CAD or anything. If more teams started using vacuums, maybe people start noticing that hole a little more. Things like that. Let's see. So also, they explicitly ruled illegal some things that teams have been using for the past couple of years, specifically like linear actuator kits. So because GoBuilda and Actibotics, Servo City, they started selling them. So I think they just wanted to make sure teams knew it was legal. And also linear slides, that's something that's been pretty common. And they've just done a few other explicit things. And they also have a wheel test just to make sure that your team isn't going to damage the tiles. It's been there in the past years, but really nobody used it. But it might become a little bit more relevant this year because I believe they removed mentions of some explicitly illegal wheels. Andy Mark sold a few wheels which were considered too grippy for FTC, so they actually made them explicitly illegal. They removed that mention, so maybe those are now legal if you pass the wheel test, where you essentially just run your robot full speed into the perimeter.
Okay.
You guys have anything else to add?
So I believe that they've now made the tampering with the insides of servos illegal.
Yeah. That's been something that I think has always been legal, or always been illegal, but I think they just had to explicitly rule it illegal. It was previously just on the forums, if I remember correctly. I'm fairly sure this is because if you look at Servo City and GoBuilda, they sell these things called servo gearboxes, and a couple of them, in the instructions, it says to remove the potentiometer from the servo and remove the stop from the inside of the servo, and then solder your own on, at least 1 or 2 of them. And I feel like a couple teams have done this and then thought it was legal just because it didn't say, is this FTC legal or FTC illegal?
Yeah, another thing they remove weight limits from inspection. So that means you're probably not going to be climbing on anything or like rolling over anything that could break. They also changed the game piece launching elevation. I think the last time it was changed was before Velocity Vortex. They changed it from 6 feet to 5 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So we're probably going to be throwing something.
Yeah.
And there's no team scoring element. So no like on Skystone we had the capstone, and Rover Ruckus we had the base marker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a lot of things to unpack there. So we'll start with weight limit. I think that at Velocity Vortex and Rescue Worlds, which were the 2 years before they had a weight limit, they actually weighed every robot. So I think they were trying to figure out like a good average weight for the robots just before they actually put the weight limit in. And then the first year they had it was due to Rover Ruckus when you had the robot hanging.
Mm-hmm.
But my guess is that the weight limit is going to be here to stay in the long term, mainly because they don't want teams to make like 100-pound robots and stuff. That was the thing, is there was a team that made like a robot which was like 90 pounds of aluminum and then
Wow.
wheels and electronics and stuff. So it's been done. I don't think they wanted teams to do that. And also it's really hard to enforce a weight limit just because getting a scale costs like $20-$30. Just save the team that much money.
Gosh.
Getting a scale that's like good costs some money. I think they just didn't see a reason in making teams buy that type of thing. And then we talked about game piece launching, and last time it was changed was again Velocity Vortex, but I think it's worth noting that it was lowered, not raised. So this most likely means, at least in my speculation, is that we're going to have a horizontal launching game. So Velocity Vortex, for those of you who are watching, was the last FTC shooting game. It was the 2016-2017 game. And it was essentially you had to shoot it into like a vertical basket, the balls. And so teams might actually shoot it up 6 feet. But by lowering that shooting elevation, it makes it much less likely that they're going to have teams shoot vertically into like a basket and rather into like a goal where it's like a vertical, instead of like a basket where you have to like make the shot like this. It's more likely that you have to like shoot it like a football type thing.
Yeah. That is a great thought. I had never thought of that.
See, here's my thought about the actual robot game. It says that they changed launching elevation, but does that mean you actually have to launch it into the goal or whatever they're using?
No.
That
They
is
always have a launching rule. Go ahead.
That is something to think about. You might not have to throw it. You might just be able to like bop it in.
Yeah. They've always had
Like
the
just
launching rule in the past, but in actually Velocity Vortex, they force you to launch it by putting a limit on how high your robot could go. So they made it so your robot could not reach high enough to actually be able to just drop it into the goal, and you actually had to shoot it. They might do something similar, but that would probably be in Game Manual Part 2.
Probably.
they also limited the control award submission length to 3 pages.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm fairly sure I know why. Some teams they want to remove all the fluff. So most teams will submit a control award which is 1 or 2 pages, which is good. And so that's great. 1 page done. Judges only have to read 1 page. But then there's some teams that submitted 20 or 30 pages, and most of them and those were just like a page diagrams that were like filled up the whole page. And I think they just wanted to discourage that because all the content can fit in 3 pages. They just made it a lot longer.
See, I think something they're trying to say with that is like you don't have to have a really long control award to win.
Yeah. putting that together with like the engineering documentation possibly being shortened, they probably don't want teams to spend as much time on, or they want to reduce the amount of time teams have to spend like making their documentation, making it look nice, and just make it the bare minimum to get the content across.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm just gonna say, engineering notebook is it's the last thing that you want to do at the end of the day.
Well, I enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
I'm like probably
go ahead.
I'm probably the only person on my team who actually will volunteer to do the engineering notebook.
Okay. Yeah, a notebook is something that's that used to be essential to FTC, but we have no idea what's happening with it. There's not really that much more room for speculation until first releases something more. But there's still some more big changes that they've made, specifically with remote events. Do you have anything to say before we move on, or
not really?
Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay, so we'll start off with actually we'll start off with how teams submit matches. That's just and how they do judging. So judging is done via video conference, according to the game manual. They might end up, and so video conference that requires high-speed internet or somewhat fast internet, and then qualification, and then matches. Matches, teams have a 7-day window. I believe it says that it can vary from region to region, but it's going to be around a week to submit 6 qualification matches. And there are no elimination matches, no line selection, nothing like that. Teams self-score their matches, including all the penalties. And that means, and they're using this thing called FTC Live Cloud, which we can talk about in a couple minutes. But teams, when they're scoring their matches, they have the option to do it on paper instead of using FTC's app for scoring. And I believe that the reasoning they stated was because some teams will not have the high-speed internet.
Yeah.
But they're doing judging over video conference.
Yeah, I think it's kind of concerning that they don't have a way for teams who don't have high-speed internet to do the judging interviews, like, because that's the only way. There's no alternative way.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that scoring is completely on the honor system. There's no video evidence required, meaning that if a team makes a mistake scoring, whether it's malicious or not, it goes. Like, nobody really can question it.
I really am intrigued by how competitions are going to take place. I can't wait to I can't wait to see how this is going to go.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, there's a new scoring system. It's called FTC Live Cloud. And we don't know that much about it, but we do know that it has like a match timer, a scorer built in, probably as a web app. And they're now requiring all international teams who have who are going to compete in remote events to register through the first system. In the past, they actually didn't require international teams to register through the first system. They would have them register through like their country, and then whoever advanced to Worlds would register officially with the first, but they're no longer doing that because they need access to FTC Live scoring. And it provides match timers, displays scoring. Regarding the matches, instead of ranking by like winning alliance, finalist alliance, that type of thing, they're still going to use the ranking points and tiebreaker points, and they're just going to rank by the the final rankings of the teams. So like your teams, some of your team scores, some of your team's autonomous scores, some of your team's endgame scores, just going down the list for advancement in place of winning alliance, finalist alliance.
So another thing that has changed is the way that they're doing inspections, it's optional, but they recommend that your team actually does the inspection by themselves.
So, there isn't gonna be any like elimination matches. It's like semifinals, finals, because we're not there physically to have alliance selection, and so because of that, we don't have any alliances to do finals with. So they're just going down like by the first place team, the second, and all that.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's the simplest solution. I'm behind it. What one side effect that it gives is that also teams can't really carry. So in the past, you would see rookie lower ranked teams who couldn't score as much getting paired with like really high ranked teams or like teams that could score a lot. And if you got a nice match schedule where you were paired with like teams that could score a lot, your team, even if you didn't score as much, would be moved to the top of the rankings.
You're right.
That doesn't happen with remote events. So the ranking is unbiased except for the fact that teams are submitting scores themselves. Because one thing that I think is worth noting is that, at least in my region, during the drivers' meeting, the referee in the past would ask how many people have read the game manual, both of them and maybe the forum. And less than half of teams would usually raise their hand, which means that a lot of teams won't know all the penalties. They won't know all of the rules relating to the game. So that's what worries me, is not teams like gaming the system to cheat their way to advance, but rather the teams that unknowingly unknowingly do things that would have gotten them a penalty, but they have no malicious intent, but they just haven't read the game manual. I feel like that's going to be more common.
So, is that it? Is that it for like?
There's a few other things. So let's see. So yeah, inspection is 100% optional. They say it's recommended, as was stated previously. But also there was a video that Ken Johnson did. It was released on the FTC official YouTube the day that the remote events game manual was released, I believe. It might have been the regular traditional event one. But what it said is that the game is going to be played somewhat differently between remote events and traditional events. Because in remote events, there's no defense involved, there's no robot-to-robot interaction. But traditional events, you're going to have he said that there might be some defense being played or robot interaction in traditional events. But also for remote events, your team only needs to have a half field. So, so most likely in the game, you don't actually have to cross the halfway point in the field.
Yeah. Now, just because you don't have to doesn't mean you can't. In Rover Ruckus, you could play with a half field, but you could also go to the other. You could also go to the other side of the field, to the other crater.
Yeah. So the game is going to be played differently, remote event or not remote event. So you're going to need to know. You're going to want to find out if your region is actually doing remote events or if they're doing traditional events, because it might change your team's strategy throughout the season if you're going to be competing remotely or if you're going to be competing in person. So yeah, you're going to have to do different strategies for your team, and then also your remote meeting. A lot of teams are going to be meeting remotely, so you're going to have to figure out the strategy regarding that. There's a lot of things you need to figure out for next season, which are completely different than what's been in previous seasons. Yeah, that's all I have.
Okay. Well, moving on from the remote events game speculation. What do we think the game elements are going to be? A lot of people are thinking that they're going to be balls or maybe smooth.
You mentioned, Arjun, that we could be throwing something horizontally, so it might not be basketball. I really thought it could be basketball and was hoping it would, but it could end up being something like football.
Yeah. They could do. I don't think they're going to actually use anything other than a ball for shooting. And all of FTC history, I don't think they've used anything other than a ball. In FRC, they used balls, and then I think they've done like a frisbee game. I don't think football has been done by first for any game. I don't think they're going to try it with FTC. But one thing that we do have to be sure of is that they're probably going to make it. They're going to have to make the field disinfectable. So that most likely means that the balls are going to be plastic, just so that they can just like dump it in bleach or something, or dump
Probably
it in some disinfectant between matches. They're probably going to make it like a hard plastic ball, which the Rover Ruckus Silver Minerals, or like you could call them the Rescue Balls. That seems like a top contender.
Well, they could be doing something baseball themed if it's not football, because that's another game where you throw horizontally.
Yeah.
Baseball
than vertically.
Baseball though involves you running like to 4 corners of a field, and the game is meant to be able to be played on a half field. So you'd be kind of like I'm trying to think of the phrase. You wouldn't have enough space for baseball.
Yeah. Also, baseball has a lot of inter-team interaction. Same with football, but like football, when you're thinking of the mini game, it would be like just like kick it into the goal or like shoot it into the goal. Baseball, you have to like throw it at a batter and then throw it, and then the batter hits it somewhere else, and then you run around the field, which is a little bit more involved.
Yeah.
So, based on all these rules, what do you think? What design do you think robots might like take this year? Do you think they're gonna have some sort of spinny intake, or something like a brush that might take things in? Do you think Mechanum might be heavily involved in this, or what? What do you think?
So, or go ahead.
I think that teams would mainly focus on a way to, like, I think they would mainly focus on ways to throw the ball without going over the height limit. That's a big possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. For those of you, so I'm personally thinking Mechanum or 6-wheel drive is going to be used by most teams. First has attempted to stop Mechanum in the past. Like Rover Ruckus was definitely a way for an attempt to stop Mechanum teams, but it didn't really work out. Last year with the neutral Skybridge, I think they might have tried, but again, didn't really do much. So I think, and they haven't made it illegal, so I think teams are going to be using Mechanum. My guess is whenever you're doing a ball intake, what most teams will do is you don't have horizontal spinners like what you saw back in last year in Skystone, but rather you're going to have like a vertical, you're going to have a roller that spins them up against the ground and brings them in. Yeah. So you can use like a foam roller. You could use some really fast wheels. Teams use like rubber tubing. A lot of different options for that, but that's what teams have done when trying to intake balls. But they might decide to like throw curveball and include blocks too or something. We don't know.
Yeah. So, based on the tiebreaker points, I really think teams should first focus on the highest scoring areas of autonomous, and then they should focus on the high scoring areas of endgame. Because like that's how the tiebreaker points are. They're going to consider autonomous points first and then endgame.
Yeah. So if you actually looked in the past, at least for qualifiers, at least in the regions near me and some other regions, if you focus on autonomous and endgame and you can do those both well, and you can reach the like soft max scores. So like last year that was like 2 Skystones and Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
If you can do that at qualifier, you're gonna do very well. Like in Virginia,
Yeah.
there's a team that only got Winning Alliance captain, I believe, or they might have gotten Winning Alliance first pick once at qualifiers. And what they had a very simple robot, but it had a consistent 2 Skystone autonomous, and it was able to cap. So if you're able to do that, focus on auto and endgame, early competitions you should be fine, and then you can start focusing on teleop later.
Yeah.
I think
Go ahead.
that I think that's something another thing that might help teams with their autonomous and their whole playing robot game with their robot in general is don't, because last year we were overthinking our arm a lot. We had like 6 servos on our arm and it was really heavy. So yeah, going off of what you said, they had a simple design. So
We had like so for our arm, we had like one servo that went and grabbed it. And we had another servo that would turn that thing that grabbed it like this, and another one that spin it. And then we had like 2 other servos on this arm that as it went out, it would like do that and keep it level. So we like it was really heavy. We used a lot of servos and it like was really complicated. And it didn't always work all that well. So
Yeah.
we had a servo that also like would move it back and forth like this. But for some reason we couldn't figure out. Sometimes it would go all the way that way. And like for no reason. And the way we had it designed, it would end up breaking the arm because it was 3D printed. It would mash it up against our side panel. So we ended up having to get rid of that servo.
Because it could only go halfway across the beam before we had to make it to where it stopped. And it was like the heaviest servo on there. And it was like hanging right off the edge.
Yeah. When you overcomplicate things, sometimes it makes your robot less consistent. But also when you're thinking about strategy this year for your team, A, keep it simple because that makes your life a lot easier. But then B, you also have to think about if you're doing remote or traditional events, because if you're thinking about traditional events, you might want to figure out the best way for you to complement an alliance partner. But if you're remote events, it's all just your team. So you're going for just highest score.
Yeah.
And a few other things that I always emphasize, and it's a little bit more that I have to emphasize this year, is if you're doing any custom fabrication, make sure that you have easy access to it year round. Like in Rover Ruckus, we laser cut our drivetrain, but we only were able to get access to the laser cutter twice. Which was like 2 times throughout the season. So we were able to get it for our first prototype drivetrain, then second prototype. But then when it came time for us to actually like iterate on it once again and integrate our robot, we weren't able to get access to it, which meant we had to drill some holes and it just didn't work out as well. So you don't want your team to be in that type of situation. There's almost always a solution from like Gobilda or Servo City or Rev, which can do the same thing, even if it's less elegant.
Yeah.
And for one thing we wanted to do Rover Ruckus, we needed a CNC machine, but the half the season the CNC machine was broken, and the other half because it's not our machine. It's there because the place we meet at. It's
We meet.
we meet at a place where there's us, 2 other FTC teams, and an FRC team, and it was used by it was used by every team but us.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
It's gonna be really cool too.
This year with 3D printers, a lot of school teams will end up using the 3D printers at their schools, but you might not be able to go into your school and get the 3D printer and print parts. So if you are a school team, you might want to try and reach out to the teacher that runs the printing facility at your school to try and take one home, because then you can actually use it throughout the season, because saying I have a 3D printer at school might not be that useful this season.
Absolutely. So, is that all?
I think so.
That's a lot of it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much, Arjun, for joining us. It was great talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our next episode is going to be on August 20th at 6:30 p.m. And we're going to be talking about designing a robot 101. What you should consider, and what you should consider when building a robot, and like what materials you should use, etc. If you want to contact us, you can email us at morethanrobotspodcast@gmail.com. Our Instagram is at FTC Team 13017. And I think that's it. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.